Cool. All right. No, so as we're starting to share screens, I guess welcome everyone. Thanks for jumping on to this brunch session in the AEST time zone, and yeah, wherever you're dialing in from. No, really good to have you all on. This is for those people that are new, our the Power BI for Enviro's meetup session. So we're really focused on presenting different Power BI examples for the environmental and water space. So. Just a bit of housekeeping. I think most of this people will be familiar with. Just as a courtesy, more to Will, the presenter, just keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. But by all means, in terms of the interactive Q&A, and really want to try and get a bit of robust discussion for this session today, feel free to come off mute if you want, and also share your video when you're happy to ask a question. Otherwise, as Will's presenting, if you have questions, feel free to just write in the chat, and one of the many experts in the call will try and answer it. Otherwise, we'll find a place to ask Will directly. As Alice mentioned, we're recording this session, and the recording and blog will be available on the YouTube channel and in the Meter group afterwards. Yeah. So just before we get started, just like to acknowledge the people and elders of the Boon Wurrung and Bunurong, people of the Kulin Nation, which is where Alice and I are dialing in from today, down in the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. Pay our respects to the people and the sort of lands and waters that we're presenting on today. And as a follow-on to that, we had last week in Australia, obviously, the NAIDOC week, which is all about sort of spreading awareness in regards to, you know, the history of traditional owners. And this year's theme was Get Up, Stand Up and Show Up. So yeah, really just like to pay our respects to the beautiful lands, waters and areas that we can sort of present on and inhabit these days. Also, Alice and I are co-founders of Discovery Eye. So just in relation, we put on the meetups each month. Sort of work that we do is largely in the Power BI for Enviro space. So whether that's training, mentoring. We also have as part of our team, Daniel Marsh-Patrick on the call, who's a developer of custom visuals, Deneb, HTML viewer, violin plot, etc. So a lot of these probably visuals you use. Daniel is the creator, so he's part of our team. Also work on end-to-end Power BI reporting as well as the graphic design element. So really using Power BI tips and tricks to enhance your data story, which is part of the reason we're so excited about this session today, because for those people that have seen the Power BI report, got the PBICs, there's some really nice features that Will take us through.
And for all of the Enviros on the call who are based in Victoria, we just wanted to do a bit of a shout out for the draft Greater Melbourne Urban Water and System Strategy. It's have your say at the moment up until tomorrow. So you have until tomorrow to have a quick review of the strategy and really provide your input into the future planning for Melbourne's water supply. Also, if you're kind of not too much in the area of water management, but you're keen to have a look at Power BI kind of for public consultation and things like that, we've also worked on the interactive dashboard in Power BI using publish to web for this study. So you can go onto the waterforlifestrategy.com website and have a look at the kind of different techniques we've used as well in trying to bring this strategy to life. So there's lots of really cool interactive things, lots of videos, lots of images, lots of infographics, and things like that to help you explore the data and understand really what's happening in this space of water management and a bit more about the strategy as well. But today we're all here to listen to Will Thompson. He's going to be presenting on the recent Gartner Bake-Off study, so analysing the UN Sustainable Development Goals with Power BI. So a little bit about this session. At the recent Gartner Data Analytics Summit in London, Will presented a report outlining some of the global progress made on providing reliable electricity access around the world and the impact of CO2 emissions. So in this session, we'll get to see Will's demo through the report and show some behind the scenes tips and tricks used to build it. So it's a really, really interesting report. We've had a bit of a look at the PBICs file. There's so much that he can go over. So Will said he wanted to make it really interactive as well. So any questions that you have, just post in the chat, or feel free to go off mute and just ask away. So a little bit about Will, in case you haven't come across him. He's a self-confessed data geek, working his way through sysadmin and DBA roles before joining Microsoft. So he spent 5 years helping customers in the UK implement and get value out of Microsoft's BI solution. And when an opportunity arose to move into the product engineering team in 2012, he jumped at it to help translate customer and market requirements into new features as program manager in the Power BI team. And for those people who are familiar with the edX courses, I think this is where I first saw Will Thompson. I think I learned Power BI just going through those edX courses. I think it was Will and Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Will. You made a great start to my Power BI career, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say today. So that was it from our end. I'll just stop sharing. So over to you, Will.
Cool. Thank you all very much. It's great to be here. I think Alice has done a great job introducing me. I'm not sure if there's much else that I need to add to that. But the kind of plan for this session, I'm going to run through the demo that I did at this summit. And I'll just to explain a little bit like how the summit worked. Gartner do this bake-off event at their analytics summit every year, and ahead of time they give us the data set and kind of a rough script of what they want to see. Each year they use kind of a data set which is trying to do kind of a data for good stuff. So previously we've looked at like the opioid crisis in the US, obviously COVID over the last couple of years. Also things like loneliness and depression, usually really cheery topics like that. But they give us the data set usually, like I said, a couple of months beforehand, and then say, here's a script that we want to of what we want to see from the product. And it's usually split into sections where, you know, it might just be overall look and feel, then something about data prep, something about sharing, something about innovations and future looking features as well. And the way that the session works is us and some competitive vendors will get on stage and we'll each do each of these demos kind of in turn. So you'll get like a 3-minute demo on the look and feel from 1, 2, 3 vendors, and then 3 minutes on data prep from 1, 2, 3 vendors. So it's really, really fast paced. And it ends up being a real challenge for us to squeeze everything into the time that we've got, but still show off the product and kind of talk about what value it can produce as well. So I can go through each of those different sections for the different parts for Power BI, but I'll take it a little bit slower because otherwise it can be like really, really, really fast and really difficult to follow, particularly when I'm sharing stuff over Teams as well. I'll take it a little bit slower. Please do interrupt if you've got questions as we go through. Maybe in each of those sections, maybe we'll pause for Q&A afterwards, after each of the sections. I probably won't go through everything because some of it, like sharing and integrating through Teams, I've just realized that the test accounts that I used previously have expired, so I might not be able to do it. B, it's probably stuff that you're kind of familiar with just from generally using Power BI. But we can talk more about it, and I'll answer any questions as we go on that too. Yeah, so that's kind of how we'll go through. So if I start sharing my screen, I'll start off with just the basics. Let's try this, and hopefully not that one. I want this. No, not that one, this one. All right, I'm going to assume you can all see the screen. So this year, the data set that Gartner sent us was all about sustainability, sustainable development. And the UN track a whole bunch of different information about this, from environmental sustainability, but also things like justice for all and kind of equality in the workplace. And you know, then there's climate change things, there's stuff about the oceans, about land management and all these different things. And the area I chose to focus on for a couple of different reasons was around CO2 emissions and access to electricity and the relationship between those two things. One of the things that we saw in the data predominantly over the last 20 years has been the way that access to reliable electricity sources has improved around the world. And one of the first things that we thought to show would be like, hey, let's just put this on a map and look at it over time. It's probably the two most fundamental dimensions in data analysis. You know, everybody looks at data over time, and comparing it over geography is so fundamental. You know, back at the start of the back in 2000, start of the millennium, 75% of people globally had access to electricity worldwide, which is pretty good. And you know, between 2000 through 2005, 2010, that value improved slightly. And in fact, if we focus on maybe like Africa and Asia here, let's filter down to just look at those. There are some real sort of like standout places where things got better. Through to 2010, we can see across sub-Saharan Africa. Make sure that filter's being applied properly. Some of these countries did start to make some improvements, but we saw a lot of improvements around the Indian subcontinent. Relatively flat, but you can see on the map here, the lightest countries, that's where less than 20% of the population had a reliable electricity source, and the darkest ones are over 80%. The UN define a reliable access to electricity as something like 4 hours or more a day of enough electricity to light your home and to charge a mobile phone. I love that charging a phone is required, is considered essential for people's electricity supply. Anyway, we saw something really interesting here in 2011. The jump here between 2010 and 2011 on this chart at the bottom, this is the number of people who didn't have access to electricity. So for some reason, it jumped up pretty significantly here in 2011, went from 1.1 billion to 1.25 billion. You know, it's a really major increase. And I can use Power BI to help me find out why is that. You know, I can right click on it and say, go ahead and explain that increase to me. Now Power BI is going to slice and dice and say, hey, that 8% increase, turns out that the majority of that was actually in India. 112 million people suddenly found themselves without a reliable electricity source. You know, the next highest country was Ethiopia with just over 11 million. It's a huge increase here in India. And I did some digging through some headlines. Turns out that in 2011, India had some major problems with its coal supply, and most of their electricity is generated by burning coal. And the second thing, there were some major windstorms that knocked out power to a huge portion of the population, particularly in rural areas. And, you know, this is something that would have taken ages for me to slice and dice through the data. Power BI helped me find it pretty quickly. And so, you know, kind of interesting, but through the rest of the 2000s, through 2015, through 2019, we start to see that number of people without access to power drops pretty significantly. You know, 2015 was interesting because that was the first year where less than 1 billion people didn't have access to a reliable electricity source. First time since it was invented. You know, it's amazing. And 2019, we see a lot of these countries, particularly around Africa, have started to get out of that lowest bracket, and the countries are getting darker and darker here. If we look at India in particular and some of its neighboring countries, there are some real major improvements. You know, Afghanistan, look at this. The rural population in 2005, only 7% had a reliable power source, but by 2019, that was at 97%. It's a massive improvement over that 14-year period. Obviously, the war in Afghanistan drove a lot of that, I think, or at least the American involvement. They'd like to make you think that that's what's driven improvements around the rural areas, but hey, who knows? But as we know, with great power comes great responsibility. I love that I managed to get that phrase into a professional situation, but as access to power grows, the amount of CO2 emissions being produced by these countries grows significantly as well. And if we look at a global level, things here, the countries, the continents in this case, where the access to electricity is at its lowest, so places in Africa where on average only 41% of the population has access to electricity, they're held back in terms of GDP per capita. It's the smallest GDP per capita, but also the smallest CO2 emissions. You know, compare that to the other side, the countries with the highest GDP per capita, which actually turns out it's Australia and New Zealand, also have the highest CO2 emissions per capita. And, you know, you can see this in real stark contrast when you look at this over time. This is a great animation. I think I feel like I'm doing my Hans Rosling thing when I start looking at this. We see these countries, these developing nations with a relatively low GDP per capita. They do start to increase, but it's only once you get up to $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 per capita that the CO2 emissions really start to increase. And so we end up with this problem where there's broadly two issues in the world. Around the developing nations, particularly in Africa, you have countries that are held back from GDP growth because of poor access to electricity. But conversely, the more developed nations around Europe, North America, where GDP per capita has grown, access to electricity has grown, but CO2 emissions are starting to grow as well. And it's only these the richest nations, places like this is Ireland, I think, or yeah, Ireland here, where they managed to keep a hold on their CO2 emissions and actually bring that down over the last few years. Another great improvement was here in Sweden. This was a pretty massive, Denmark, sorry, not Sweden, have done a pretty good job of reducing their CO2 emissions as well. So that was the first thing that I kind of showed. They're like, hey, let's just get some insights from this data, show the sort of things that we can produce. Now, I could spend some time talking about the way that I built this report, some of the tips and tricks for building these visuals. Maybe I'll come back to that a little bit later on, because I'm going to dive into, in another demo, I'm going to dive into actually how we go about building visuals in Power BI. But I'm just going to pause there and see if anybody's got any questions just about kind of what we covered in the first little bit.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. I think Kerry asked how you get the connected lines on the scatter chart. Daniel just answered in the chat, but if you wanted to go through that, we'll just
Yeah, on the scatter chart. So if you use a scatter chart like this and add something into the play axis to create this animation, then whenever you select something, you get that line. It's showing you, over time where that bubble has moved, how it's moved across these different years. I can select a couple of these and track them all over time as they all move around. It's a really, really nice way of kind of saying, hey, I want to track these three and then see where they bounce around, and they're going to go all over the place in this case, because GDP per capita has gone down in some recessions and things as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's such an effective feature, so you can trace it. No, it's really cool. We just got a question. If you could share the link of the data set.
Yeah, we can talk a bit more about that actually, because that's a good segue into the data prep section, which maybe we can cover a little bit later on. But the place where I got this from was the UN Stats data, the UN Stats website. So the UN publish a whole bunch of indicators. You can go and download all of this if you want. I've actually got it somewhere in a zip file that I did make available for everybody. I think I posted it on, or maybe I didn't in the end. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of data here, bunch of CSV files, Excel files. It is pretty painful if you really want to go through and try and pull everything out. And a lot of the indicators are very sparsely populated. Like you'll only have data for a couple of years over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. But yeah, this UN Stats data website was a really good place to go if you want to go and find this data. And of course, they've got stats on all sorts of different things, from poverty to climate change to all sorts.
Thanks. And also, yeah, we did have Shannon Lindsay present last time, and she was having a look at the same data set as well. So I think she pointed everyone to this location. So I think that was all. We did have another question just about what you'd selected on the first page, if you were selecting Asia as well as Africa in the slices. But I think
yeah, so
you were just chatting through the trends.
When you make those selections, the map and everything is going to filter down as well to just showing those. So that's just Africa. The Asian one covers a big area because I think it tries to include everything in Russia as well. But yeah, I can control select on those, and then you can see them both. I love this orthographic projection. This is the shape map, the out of the box shape map that's still in preview. Yeah, we know. We're going to fix it. But I didn't know about this until recently. But yeah, I love the
question on that one. I was having a look at the PBEX file, and it looked like you'd used a custom country shape. Is that is this something you can do out of the box, or do you need to have a custom map with the shape map?
I didn't think it was a custom one. I thought it was out of the box. I could be wrong. Come on. Why is this not responding now? Okay, something's happening with, okay, go. Oh yeah, it is. Add map type countries.geojson. I don't know, to be honest. If I just change this to be I thought there was a country one. Maybe there's not. Maybe it does need a
Okay, yeah.
custom countries, custom map.
Oh, that's
There you
cool.
go. Obviously does.
We're getting some comments, I think, that are helping us out. So Daniel is posting, Darren Gospel saying, I think we just need a shapefile. So a shapefile in the vector. So that's what it looks like. You've hit custom file and then it's pointing to a shapefile GeoJSON format.
Yeah, so it looked like there wasn't a world global map, not like you can with the field map and the other map.
Yeah.
But it has like America, it has Australia, just not the world.
It's very cool.
Yeah, the reason that this is still in preview is that these country boundaries are such a political issue. You know, the disputed boundaries around here. Like we on the Power BI team don't want to be in the business of maintaining these shape files, which is why the Bing map, the Bing team manage that, and they have a service that deals with that. So we don't ship those country boundaries with this. That must be why. To be honest, the province and county boundaries and like the state boundaries in the US haven't changed, but I think there are some French province boundaries that changed, and I don't think this got updated for the same reason. That we're trying to find a way where we can use a service that has a reliable kind of update cadence for those kind of boundaries, rather than us having to ship it with the bot with the product. The work that we're doing with the Azure Maps folks is going to get us a lot closer to this kind of thing. They obviously have that service, and the Azure Map visual is going to get to a point where we can replace all of these with it. That's kind of the roadmap for it.
Oh, awesome! Cool. Oh, cool. Thank you. I think yeah, there's a lot of comments in the chat about the shape map, but I think that's all the questions at this stage.
Okay. All right, so let's jump on. So the next demo that I did was kind of showing how we go about building these visuals, and I always start my just get rid of this. I always start my Power BI demos by using Q&A to build some visuals. So if you're ever doing a demo and you want to kind of have a report that looks really nice, remember that Q&A kind of automatically finds the space available for it. So when you double click on a chart, double click on the background to insert a new chart like that, it'll align itself with the size of the visuals that are nearby. So it just fills the space available to it, and it looks really nice. So you can then start typing, you know, to start asking questions about the data. And I had to do quite a bit of work behind the scenes to make sure that Q&A kind of understood what I was asking for, and you know, make sure that when I typed access to electricity, it knew which measure or which metrics I wanted to ask about. And that's using the synonyms capabilities of Q&A and kind of adding in phrases rather than having to type in the full, you know, access to electricity, percentage of the population by whatever, the full name of the measures. So that was super quick, and doing things like GDP per capita by country or something similar. And, you know, I love this as a way of just quickly kind of building out reports. And Q&A is one of those features that takes a bit of time to set up, but once it's going, I think it's like super simple for people to use, and always goes down well when you're building these things in demos. And then the other thing that I had over here was our smart narrative. Now, I'm just going to paste the one that I had back in because I think the formatting of it wasn't quite right before. But this is the automatically generated text. Seriously, you click it once and it goes and finds, okay, based on all the data that's in these other visuals, it'll look at the trend, it will look at, you know, when it rose most sharply, it'll tell you about the incline, and it will go and look at the highest and lowest values for the scatter charts, and even things like splitting the split between urban and rural areas. Like, I love how it can just generate all these things for you immediately. And then what I always show is the way that these things are automatically, you know, all automatically linked up. So when I brush over one of these, I get filters and I get highlights, and the summary over here updates automatically as well. And then even if you do things like using some of the analytics, so I'm going to add a forecast, just turn that on. Let's say we want to forecast for another 30 years into the future, and we can ignore the last 5 years, hit apply, and it will go and regenerate that forecast. I think this is interesting as well. So by 2044, this says that we're going to have about 95% of the population will have reliable access to electricity. But if we look at, this was ignoring the last 5 years, in the last 5 years, actually the global actuals number, the blue line here, has accelerated. It's gone outside of our kind of forecast interval here. So we're actually doing better in the last 5 years than we have done for the previous 20 or so running up to that. So this is accelerating. Maybe we'll hit that number sooner. But again, here, this is another one where, you do the filtering and the forecast updates. I love how all of these things are kind of connected immediately. But as well as just kind of adding these visuals, I wanted to do some ML analysis on this to say, actually, what influences CO2 emissions? What influences these things? And using the key influences visual, it was really quick for me to start building these things. So if I was to, let me actually go through and build this one from scratch, because I think this is really cool. So I'm going to add up our key influences visual here. And then there's a whole bunch of data that comes with that comes through from the UN here. So typically, all of these metrics, I've done things like pulling out the change over the last 20 years so that I could see. We kind of normalize the numbers, turn them into percentage increases or decreases. And then also I did it by country, and I kind of grouped some of them together as well. So rather than actually having a fixed number, I just wanted to group into high increase, medium increase, low increase. Because I think to a certain extent, the key influences visual works better when you kind of you ask to explain it by groups rather than by numeric information, because then it's like, well, if your CO2 or if your fertility rate goes up by 1 or by 1.4 or by 1.6, well, what does it mean for the fertility rate to go up by 1.6? It's kind of weird. But hey, we're going to analyze our CO2 emissions. I would look at it by country and by year as well. I'll put year twice in here. Which one do I need? That one? I think it was this one. And then I'm going to start explaining it by some of these other fields. I want to know what causes CO2 to decrease. Obviously, that's going to be the more interesting one. So let's add in a few of these other fields. And each time you add one of these fields, the way that it kind of retrains the model or rebuilds the model, I think is really cool. And it was interesting here to look at some of these kind of geodemographic indicators rather than just the environmental ones, because it shows some really interesting correlations. And these are just correlations, right? Now, there's no kind of definite causality between these, but things like a high increase in literacy rate has the same correlation with a high decrease in electricity generation from coal. Obviously, burning coal to generate electricity generates a bunch of CO2, but if you decrease that, you get the same decrease in CO2 emissions as you do by increasing your literacy rate. I found that was really fascinating. It's not the same everywhere around the world, though, right? So I use Power BI's cluster detection to cluster the different countries here. And if I just choose cluster 3, which is these developing nations, here there's a slight difference. So here it's a decrease in the fertility rate and an increase in life expectancy that's correlated with CO2 emissions decreasing. So this is, countries that are making the basics, getting the basics right, improving life expectancy, improving basic standards of living. There's a correlation there between CO2 emissions decreasing. Compare that to these more developed nations around here, this first cluster. Here is things like poverty ratio decreasing. So this is, they've already managed to get their population clothed and fed and housed appropriately. And they're bringing down that poverty ratio. So there's more people with disposable income, and the countries can now worry, the governments can now worry about CO2 emissions and getting a hold on that. I'm making a bit of a leap there to some causality, I think. But it was really interesting to see how these different clusters of countries have different key influences on CO2 emissions. Really interesting stuff to find here, and I think again, kind of just kicking around, playing with these ML models gives you some kind of interesting insights. All right, I'm going to pause there again, see if there are any other questions.
We haven't had any in the chat, but now is the time if anyone does have any questions about this. Got a comment, fantastic way of insight generation. Yeah, for sure. I did have a question. You said it was Power BI's automatic cluster generation. Do you want to just chat through that? I've never used that feature before.
Yeah, so if you have a scatter chart, let me, oops, I didn't mean to remove the whole thing. That's not quite what I meant. Come back. What I meant to do, if you have a scatter chart and you take the legend out here. So I'm just doing the XY scatter here. You'll find this automatically find clusters option. And what this does is looks through it does a k-means clustering. You can tell it how many clusters you want to find, let's say 5. And it just does a k-means cluster on the data that's in here, and outputs a new field into your model somewhere. Eventually, there it is, country clusters, just groups it up, sticks it in the legend. Super simple, super quick.
Then available to use in other visuals.
Yeah, exactly, because it's just another field here. So you can see it's doing it on XY and also the size, which is why there's 2 major ones, which I guess is China and India. They come out in their own cluster as well. And then yeah, I can grab country clusters, stick in here by I don't know, poverty ratio or something, and make that one of these. I don't know, poverty ratio is not a good example. Just do CO2 emissions. This probably doesn't mean anything, but you get it, right? I'm using the same clusters, and you can go and edit them as well. The grouping here for editing clusters, I can rename them. So I forget what it was, but like cluster 1 is the developing nations. And then those labels are going to carry through and be used anywhere else in your charts as well. You can do clustering on more than those 3 attributes as well. If you have a table, so there you go, CO2 emissions in here. Let me add a couple of other metrics in here. I can use automatically find clusters here on a table, and it'll do these clusters across all of the different measures that are included in the table. So it would look at CO2 emissions and percentage of population here and access to electricity. So you're kind of building clusters on top of clusters here, which is kind of meta, but yeah, it's really powerful actually.
Awesome. I think I just beat Kerry to asking the same question.
Cool.
But if there weren't any other questions at this stage, yeah, maybe press on.
Yeah, so let me just jump back to a couple of the other tips and tricks here when we were building these. So Alice, you mentioned, or Christian, maybe you mentioned Miguel Myers. He's one of the folks on our CAP team, and he's a kind of a graphic designer by training, and he does an amazing job whenever we build these demos of making things look just amazing. I wish I had the kind of before and after of what this looked like when I gave it to him. I had a map and I had some charts, but they were using ugly as anything colors. They were not very nicely formatted and fitted into the rest of the page. He did a ton of work on theming this to use this kind of more monochrome look and feel for it, and it really helped just kind of call out kind of the key things. He worked on this this kind of filter that then highlights the bar that's selected. This is a really cool little trick that he did, excuse me, where he's got this range slicer that's just selecting an individual value, and then there's a conditional formatting rule on this chart, which looks for the year that was selected in the slicer here. So it looks for which year is selected, and then conditionally formats the bar based on that color or based on that value. So it's like really cool things that just make it super simple to see. Okay, what value have I got selected? Which year am I looking at? He also had things like this little legend here. I was like, oh wow, Miguel, how did you make that legend? And then he showed me that these are just like emojis. They're just Unicode characters for a square that he just colored differently. So it's like you just take these and say, okay, I'm going to make that one red. So it's like a load of kind of manual work to set it up, but wow, it looks really cool. And when you've got these kind of fixed formatting thresholds, not a problem to do it. It'd be nice if we had like an automatic legend for that, but we don't. The other thing that he did that I thought was a really simple trick, and actually something that people can use all over the place, is this text box here, where he's used some of these dynamic bits of dynamic text to kind of call out the overall value for the percentage of people who had access to electricity. This is really nice as well. So he uses some of the smart narratives capability So if we go back over to the smart narratives, you know, normally people are used to seeing this where, yeah, you click the smart narratives button, it generates this whole text. And, you know, these numbers here, 14.49, you know, it's automatically put these things in, but you can customize it, right? So currently 14.49 was this automatically generated value. Well, if I want to go and add a new one, I can do that as well. Let's go up here somewhere. So I'm going to add a new thing in here. And it's going to be percentage rural population without access to electricity. No, it's just using Q&A, but it will go figure out the values. I didn't want to do it as a percentage. I don't know, whatever. And just drops that into the visual for you, into the text box. So it just becomes another little bit of text that I can then go and put whatever commentary I want to around it. And he used that on this first page in just the same way, kind of saying, come on. Yeah, you can see here it's got the same kind of preview for it as it's loading, just for that value. It's a really nice way to kind of make these call outs without having to layer a bunch of different visuals on top of each other. What else did I want to point out here? I should put a call out around the background of this as well. You know, these kind of rounded rectangles that you put in the background, I think are a really nice way, again, of separating different parts of the page and choosing what's the key information that I want to call out? What's the key information? What's the supporting information? Where should people's eyes be drawn first? He did a great job with that. And the little page navigator up here is quite nice as well. Yeah, okay. Where else was I going to go next? Okay, I was going to talk about the data prep side of things as well. So I'm going to move away from the visuals, talk a bit about data prep as well. And over in PQ, I can kind of run through the demo. I'm sure a lot of this you're kind of familiar with already, but there's a few things that I do want to call out here. So when I started doing this demo, I wanted to point out a little flag website that I'd made that just had some information about flags and country information, because this is the sort of information you find all over the internet. Some random data on a website. I want to scrape this data and use it in my reports as well. And this is super simple to do using Power BI. So over in my data prep window, I can say, hey, I'm going to go create data from a new source. Power BI has hundreds of different connectors that you can use to connect to whatever information you need, from text files to databases to all the different apps that are in there as well. I am just going to use the web. So let's search for a web connector. Oh, come on. There you go. My laptop struggles a bit sometimes when I'm running Teams and sharing stuff as well, and desktop open. So I'm going to paste in the URL, and the first thing it's going to do is try and make a connection to that web page and then start scraping the HTML off there. But as we saw, that data wasn't really structured in an HTML table. It uses a bunch of CSS to show things in different ways. But Power BI can use we can use AI here in this web connector to pull out the bits of information from that web page that we're most interested in. And all I need to do is give it some examples of the first set of data I want to pull down, and it will figure out, okay, where in the CSS can I find that information for all the other countries along the way, if it connects. Whilst it's doing it, quick shout out to the GitHub Pages folks. I don't know if any of you ever have to stand up web pages for anything, but this was a super simple way of creating a web page. You just create a new GitHub repository, generate a little index file, you know, upload the images, upload the things. It's just a static bit of HTML. And then there's a couple of buttons that you click to say, yep, make this a website. And lo and behold, it stands up a web page. It's great. Really, really easy. Okay, so Power BI is connected to it now. You can see it's kind of tried to find some tables, but the HTML code itself is a big mess and hard to navigate, really. So I'm just going to use add table using examples, and I'm just going to tell Power BI what I want to see. So the first column is going to be the name of the country. So Afghanistan. And then I give it a second example. It's going to be Albania. Once I've done two, boom, it figures out everything else. So it's looking through the CSS, looking how to repeat what repeated data there is, and pulling that down for me. So let's do the population as well. 38 million, 1,000. This time I only need to give it one example because it's already figured out how it repeats across the rest of the page. Scraping data from the web has never been so simple. I love doing this with all sorts of random data that I find around the web. Really, really nice. So this was country, give them all a name, give the other one's name, hit OK, and it will go and preview it, load it down. Now, I've already done it just to save us a few seconds. If I go over to here, it's got the data for me already. But how simple is it, right? I hit, paste in the URL, say, give it some examples, type in what I want, and Power BI figures it out for me. I love this. And we can use this AI to do some cleaning up of this data as well. So for example, I might want to split the country into the name and the country code here. So I can say, hey, go and add this column from examples. And again, if you've not seen this is really, really cool. So you can type in Afghanistan, and it figures out, okay, well, what's the formula that we need to transform this into the output that I specified here? And it's saying transform is going to be text dot before delimiter. So it's looking for a space, and it's saying, give me the text before the space. Now, there may be some examples in here where the country name has a space, like the, Democratic Republic of Congo or wherever. But if it got anything wrong, I could just go in and specify, actually, no, I didn't mean Austria, I meant something slightly different. And it will rejigger that formula for me as I go and make those changes. So for example, I might do the same thing for population density here. So I'm going to give it another example. Let's make this one a range of data. So if this one's 0 to 20, actually this one would be, what would this be? This would be 40 to 60, right? It figures out, okay, so that one's 40 to 60 because the density was 58. Well, what would the equivalents for the rest of them be? And it figures out, okay, here's the range. It's got a range size, it's got an offset. Is it inclusive? And then it figures out, okay, round it down, subtract the offset, and then give me the output. But how easy is that for grouping things into the range? And it even shows you then, okay, well, what was the formula? And I can go and customize it and mess around with it if it didn't quite get it right. I love doing this bit. So bringing that data in, super simple. Obviously, I can do things like merging this data. I can merge my queries together. I don't know if you've ever tried doing this with the fuzzy matching as well. I love using this fuzzy matching. Like, it's really good when we're pulling in data from a couple of different places. So the UN data and the World Bank, they don't always use quite the same terms for different countries. So I can say, okay, well, I'm going to tell you which the fields are, but I'm going to use fuzzy matching to actually do the merge. And then if the terms aren't quite the same, it's still got a good chance that it'll be able to match them up, and it'll tell me how many matches it's got based on the previews. But of course, you don't even need to do the merging, right? You could just load them all in as separate tables. And I always show this bit in my demos as well. I'm sure if you're familiar with Power BI, you've spent time here in the modeling view. I've built these relationships. I built hierarchies in here. So I've got like this geography hierarchy with regions, and I've got all my measures and things in here as well to help kind of make the semantics of this model just make even more sense. And this is where I came in and added a few synonyms for some of those terms that I was going to use in Q&A to make it easier if I'm going to go try and build these visuals using natural language as well. Okay, so that was my data prep and modeling demo. Super little quick one there as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, that's awesome. We got a lot of love on the AI features. Daniel's loving GitHub Pages, and he's going to steal your flags source.
Yeah, please do.
We have a question from him, just about when you connect up to the data via web and you're doing the data processing and the AI. He had a question, does it refresh in the service?
Yes. Yeah, connecting to the web. So assuming that there's no, I mean, in this case, this is a publicly accessible web page. So the column by example stuff and pulling from a web page by example, that all works in the service as well when you publish it up. Trying to think if there's any situations where it wouldn't. If it was a web page that you had to log in before you could get to the page, there are times when that won't work. So you can't use it to scrape like a SharePoint web page. Yeah, if you needed to log in with an API key or something like that, you might need to do some extra stuff around PQ to be able to use those tokens properly. That's beyond my PQ knowledge. I don't claim to be an expert in PQ, but if it's anonymously accessible, it's usually pretty good.
Awesome. Did that answer your question, Mim, or did you have a specific? Have you tried this? Or I know that we ran into a little bit of trouble trying to do something similar with the Bureau of Meteorology. It was an API, so it worked in the desktop. It was publicly available. We didn't need a key or anything, but when we got to the service, something tricky was happening there. So I think we've had this chat before. I think Pat Booth on the call as well gave us some tips.
One other thing that's worth checking is, particularly if you're merging data sources, you need to make sure that the privacy level of the data sources is set appropriately. So in here in data source settings, is it this permissions one? I forget now. One of these settings, yeah, here, this privacy level. So if you've got things that are coming from like a SQL server and then you've got like a public API, Power Query will say, okay, I'm not going to try and merge things that have got different privacy levels because there's a danger that I'm going to use something from a private source as a clause in a query for a public source, and that could leak information from one place to another. If you go through and say, make them all public, or you go and check the text box in the options that says, or the checkbox in the options that says, ignore privacy settings when merging data sources, you don't need to worry about that. Like in desktop, it works great. You get to the service, and there's also, you know, that can kick back in again in the service, and it does some extra checks there. The other thing is if there's anything which is a dynamic data source where you don't know what the data source is because it's parameterized from something, you can get into some scenarios that aren't supported there as well, where it's trying to do the same kind of privacy checking, but it can't check it because it's a dynamic source. I forget exactly the scenario, but there are some cases where that doesn't work as well. So that might be what you're running into.
Yeah, so we've got a couple more comments. Mim says thanks. Kerry's used web data fairly frequently. And Pran said sometimes changing the connector from web browser.contents to web.contents helps overcome issues in the Power BI service. Kerry said grabbing data from Wikipedia is fun as well. So that's another data source to go and explore.
Yeah, so lots from Wikipedia. That's always my go-to place if I've got a demo that I need to build around something specific. Tables of data in Wikipedia about blah, and then it will find it.
Awesome, but that's all the questions on this.
Okay.
On this part.
So a couple more things that I wanted to show. One, we talked a lot, or we had a section in the demo about sharing, and obviously I use Teams to kind of lead the most of that demo. It's like, hey, here's how you can embed a Power BI report into a Teams tab, so you've got it when you're chatting or when you're working on like recurring meetings. But the other thing that I started to show that is kind of new was how you can also embed these things into emails. So if you're using Outlook in the web, I'm not going to load it up now because like I said earlier, my test accounts aren't working, and I don't want to do it with my own email because I'll probably show something that I'm not allowed to show. But you can embed the same kind of cards that you get when you share over Teams into Outlook. And being able to do that is like just in the process of your day-to-day work, everything that you do, you know, think about how much time you spend in Teams or in Outlook. Like that's most of my day. Being able to embed and drop in my Power BI links to my Power BI reports in the same place makes that process super smooth. And then, of course, the last thing that I showed, and bear in mind this demo was back in May, was the PowerPoint integration. So this came out in the May release, I think. And oh, where did it go? No, it is this one. I showed this, that, hey, I can have a PowerPoint report here, but now I can drop my Power BI slides into this. If you've not played with this, this is brilliant. Think about the way that you tell stories in your business. For the most part, people go and do communications using PowerPoint. And the fact that I can drop now this report into here, I can have all the same interactivity, do all the same animations, slicing and filtering, but then I can drop different, you know, kind of comments on top of it, and I can add little pieces next to it. You know, I can go and say, I want to hide the filter pane if I wanted to. I forget how I do this. I'm going to turn off the filter pane. You know, I may not need that. Just want to kind of minimize what's being shown. drop annotations on top of this. And then even, if I want to take a screenshot of it, make it a saved image so that I know this data is not going to change if I come back to it in a couple of days' time. But I can always get back and say, hey, yeah, I want to refresh it and go and analyze it a bit more. Maybe if somebody asks me a question in my presentation, I can come in and interact with it a bit more to answer those questions. We started using this internally more and more, and it's just changed the way that we do service reviews, because we've got service reviews in a Power BI report, but we want to put commentary around it. So they're always here now. Really, really nice way of kind of combining those two worlds and doing storytelling with data in PowerPoint. Love it. Okay, so the last thing that I showed in the demo, just in the last couple of moments that we've got here, is some future-looking stuff about where we're going with Power BI in the future. And actually, one of the great things was this was just released, just announced back in June, in the June release, and that is this AR capability that we're bringing to our mobile apps. And I started off talking about how Power BI goals, or Power BI metrics as it's now called, could be a great way of tracking sustainability for any organization. You might have information in reports like here about energy consumption, temperature and humidity in different meeting rooms around campus. But if you're just sitting at a desk and looking at a static report, or even a live updating report, but it's devoid from the context of where this meeting room is. Sure, I can go to my mobile app and I can get the same reports. I can see it as I'm walking around the building. But even better than that, we can take this data and pin it in the physical 3D space where those meeting rooms are that are generating that information. So I've got the same report here. I'm going to open up on my mobile device, but then I can go into the menu and I can say, hey, I want to pin this in the space where that meeting room is actually located. So just wait for the video to catch up a little bit. And what this then does is uses the AR capabilities within of any device. It's available for iOS and it's coming to Android later. As you move it around, we detect all of the architectural, the objects around, and drop this report into the 3D space. So I can move it around, resize it, and then I kind of lock it back in place by moving the camera around. And it uses something called Azure Spatial Anchors to detect what's nearby, where I'm looking, uses GPS, uses the sensors on your phone to do that. And then if I come back at a later date or somebody else comes along, they pull up the same device, mobile app, use this AR scanner, move the camera around, and it detects the same objects and drops that report back in exactly the same location. As you move towards it, you'll even get the little preview pop up as it streams in. There we go. So I can see this is the data that this meeting room is generating, right in context of where the data is coming from, where the data is being generated. But in the bottom right-hand corner there, you see the little radar chart. That's showing there are two dots there because there's this report that I'm looking at, this one in the middle, but there's one over to the left as well. And as I pan across, you'll see there are reports here pinned on each of the elevators showing me the energy consumption, the number of trips that these elevators have taken, how many people were in those elevators as they were going up and down, when they've been inspected, are they due for a new inspection? And you can imagine being like a facilities manager or on the maintenance team walking around and saying, hey, as I'm here, do any of these elevators need a service? And of course, I can click through into one of those reports to see a bit more detail and carry on my analysis. But this kind of data in space is really changing the way that people think about the correlation of the combination of the physical 3D environment and the data that they've got about objects in that 3D environment. So this could be, in a retail scenario, each of the different gondolas that I've got merchandise on, I can do my planograms here, have them pinned using Power BI to report on them, show inventory information, show what stock needs to be replenished. I showed this at the event. There was a casino company that came up and said, hey, I want to use this on my casino floor and have a little report for each blackjack table or each set of slot machines, how much revenue they're making, how long are the customers staying at each of the different parts of the casino floor. I was like, that's a really interesting, different sort of use case that I hadn't thought of before. There's some really innovative things that I think people are going to start doing with this AR capability, because it's just any device that's in your pocket. I don't need any special HoloLens or anything to do this. You just do it off your mobile phone. Cool. So that was the last bit of the demo that I showed. Any questions on that one?
Oh, that was awesome. There's so many different applications for this in the environmental industry as well. I know
Sure. Yeah,
chatting
come
with lots
on.
of people who we work with, they're so excited. We did have a couple of questions just from Paran. Did you use any custom visuals in the report, or are they all Microsoft created? And another one from Paran is how do you manage to fit slices or bookmarks in the Power BI mobile layout as well?
So there were no custom visuals in that entire report, which I think is actually kind of cool. I think the play access and the map are obviously ones that people get excited about, but yeah, they're out of the box visuals. How do I fit slices and bookmarks into mobile layout? Something that I think is fairly new that a lot of people haven't discovered is that there's actually a mobile report layout option. So you can have a separate layout and a separate look and feel for your report pages when they're on a mobile device. And so things like the bookmark navigator really make it easier then to squeeze in your bookmarks and those navigation things in mobile reports. The other thing is the filtering experience when you're on a mobile device is much nicer than the filter pane in the desktop, I think. Certainly, like moving stuff from being slices to being filters saves a bunch of real estate when you're designing for a small screen. And they've got these kind of like built-in experiences for managing filters like that. So to take a look at that, I think it's a good way of kind of maximizing the amount of information you can get into a small screen.
And just one more maybe quick question is, can you show how the map legend was created again, please?
Yeah, I can show that one.
Yeah, I guess mapping's something that a lot of people do in the environmental industry, and especially
totally.
tend to be quite difficult.
Let's go back over here.
That was a very neat trick. I think that was one of the first things I went to the PBIX to have a look. I was like, how did he do that? Is that an image?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do it with images. This is just it's a text box, and these are Unicode characters for squares. So you just go copy and paste them, and then put a couple up there, and then you can just highlight them manually. This is just manually changing the text color. So Miguel just went through and kind of generated 10 of these little blocks and then just colored them appropriately according to the gradient. So there's nothing clever going on here, really. It would be brilliant if we could just press a button and generate a legend, but yeah, you have to kind of manually do it.
And it's good to be able to customize it like this as well.
Yeah,
one last question, if we've got time, from Mim. When will we have location parameter? With a laughy face. So maybe he's asked it before.
Location parameters. I'm not quite sure what he means, but I'm sure he's being cheeky.
Yeah.
Doesn't know what Mim's like.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Oh, thank you so much. That was so many really cool different techniques, all kind of squeezed into one presentation. And it's really cool just to see the thought process behind how you've gone through to present the data, but also all the data storytelling. Like you went through and explained what the insights were from the data. And I think that's the most powerful thing about Power BI, when you take a step further and you stop talking about the techniques and the charts and you start really getting into that conversation about the data very quickly. That's what it's there for. So that was awesome.
I think, particularly for these kind of demos that we do for conferences, for events, whatever, telling a story about like what we found in the data and getting people interested, like that for us from a product point of view is like that's half the battle. Because if you've got somebody interested and they want to have a conversation about what the data is showing, that gives you an opportunity to show off the product. So we always try and make sure that there's an interesting story and there's some interesting insights that we found, but we find the insights by using the product. So they're obviously, like, all the AI stuff is the thing that kind of pointed me in the right direction for all of those insights. There was an article on the Our World in Data website that kind of pointed me in the direction of the developed nations versus the developing nations and CO2 emissions. But like explaining the increased stuff and then doing clusters and everything, it's like all of those were things that the product helped me find. So it's like a good indicator that the product's helping out as well.
Well, thank you so much. There's a lot of love in the chat as well. I think everyone got a lot out of it and really enjoyed it as well. I'll just quickly share screens again, just to close out today. If anyone does want to watch a recap, if we went through it really quickly, we'll share the key takeaways and also the video recording on our blog and YouTube channel as well. As well, if you missed any of our past sessions, we've got all the different sessions up there as well. And coming up, I think it's either next month or in September, we've got the CSIRO team presenting on the Great Barrier Reef dashboards. So these have just gone live, which is really cool. It's a really good use case for Power BI analyzing more survey data. So it's a very interesting data set. Oh yeah, Christian just reminded me, it also showcases DNF. So Daniel created some really cool charts in this one as well. We've also got One and Water presenting again, doing a Power BI showcase for water management. That one's been rescheduled, I think, until October. Just they wanted to get a little bit more feedback data to make the presentation a bit more interesting. But as always, we're always looking for really different use cases and interesting use cases of Power BI across the environmental industry. So no matter if you're at the start of your journey or you've got some really kind of deep, complex things to present, we would love to have you on. So please get in touch with us, email Christian, or just hit us up on our website as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. For all of the new people, if you're first time, or all our old regulars, we're very excited. We're almost up to 1,500 members. So I think we just need maybe 25 more or just a couple more. But yeah, thank you so much. We really love this group. It's awesome to just have everyone here interested in both Power BI and the environmental industry. Oh, and Caleb's up. He wanted to say hi. He's over from Baker. So we'll just stop the recording now. As usual, we're happy to stick around just for another couple of minutes, say hi, answer any further questions.